Morning, guys. Happy Wednesday. I hope you're all having an awesome week so far. Um, if you are on my email list, you might have seen an email that I sent out earlier this week about an important consideration for vegans or vegetarians. Now, I've had a lot of conversations recently that has with friends, family, colleagues, clients. That scares the living daylights out of me slightly. And I'm going to explain why. Obviously, vegetarianism and veganism is very popular right now, and it's very trendy, and it's gaining momentum, especially with the whole climate change and the ethics and that sort of aspect coming into it. And while that's all very fantastic and it's great that we're all getting involved in these causes, I think when it comes to making those sorts of decisions, we really need to consider how this is affecting or the possible effects of our health when making these decisions, all right? Because we're not just making these decisions and it's impacting the planet, it's also impacting our bodies, because obviously we're changing what we're putting in our bodies. So I hear a lot of people jumping on this bandwagon without truly knowing what a healthy vegetarian or vegan diet is. You know, they'll have friends that go, oh, I've gone vegetarian or vegan and I feel fantastic. And they go, oh, okay, great. Well, I'll do it too. And where the disconnect is that either the person taking on the diet has no idea what that person is actually eating and what that vegetarian or vegan diet actually looks like. And also, these are two entirely different people with entirely different needs. And what's right for one person and what works really well and makes that person feel great and improves their health may not be the same for the next person because of genetic considerations or changes in physiology and that kind of thing, and just general needs. So equally, I think we have a bit of a social responsibility when recommending these diets. If something works really well for us, that is fantastic, and I think it's great that we share those experiences, but I think it's really important to make sure that we're encouraging people to seek professional advice before they take on those sorts of recommendations, because we could be saying to somebody, that we did really well on a vegan diet and this person should as well, and they might do it in a way that's very different to the way that you would, or might do it in a way that just doesn't suit them, and they could be causing actual damage to their health. So I just want to jump in here really quickly and kind of give you a couple of considerations to think about when if you're looking, or if you have recently moved to a more vegetarian, vegan, plant-based diet. Now, I talk a lot about plant-based diets, and by that I refer to diets that are based around plant foods as much as possible. However, for the reasons that I'm going to come to shortly, I'm going to start this out with a caveat saying that I don't actively recommend people to adopt a vegan diet. There are some vital nutrients that are only available in animal foods, and if you're happy to supplement, then that's absolutely fine. You can do a vegan diet perfectly healthily. However, I prefer to go for whole foods and get as much of our nutrients from foods as possible. So I personally don't advocate and recommend people to adopt a vegan diet, but I do recommend that they adopt more of a plant-based diet, all right? So there is a difference. A diet that is based mainly on plants versus one that is solely on plants. All right, so that's my little intro disclaimer, I guess, but I'm going to explain why, all right? And there is a real risk of deficiency, all right? That's the bottom line. You can Google this, you can look at studies, you can do whatever you like if you don't believe me, but there is a real risk of deficiency of certain nutrients with vegan diets. Now, it's not always the nutrients that you think, all right? So people often come to me and go, oh, I'm cutting out meat, or I'm going more plant-based or vegan, and I'm worried about my protein intake, and I'm worried about my calcium intake. All right, now, there are actually very reliable sources, plant sources, of both protein and calcium. So I very rarely see people that have vegan or vegetarian diets that are deficient in those nutrients if they're doing it well. Of course, there's terribly formulated vegan diets where, yes, you may be, a bit deficient in protein or calcium because they're found in lots of leafy green vegetables and things like that. So a very beige processed vegan or vegetarian diet can be deficient in those, but it's a really easy fix food-wise. The two big deficiencies that concern me the most, and that I think most people don't know enough about when they adopt these diets, is B12 and EPA and DHA, or the omega-3s. Now, most people wouldn't even know what, apart from omega-3s, people are a little bit more aware of, I would say, because there's a lot more sort of popularity around it. But B12 is one that is super, super important, and that a lot of people they wouldn't know what foods are in it, they won't know what it does. It's a bit of a forgotten nutrient, but it is showing up in research lately to be incredibly vital. And these two deficiencies, the vitamin B12 and the omega-3s, concern me the most because these two nutrients are used in every single cell in just about every process that happens in our body. So if we're deficient, then everything suffers, all right? It's not just one little part that might suffer that we can kind of get by and manage with. Every single cell suffers. So B12 is incredibly important for our nervous system, our brain, and our mood, and our energy, our DNA replication, metabolism. So we're talking weight, we're talking cardiovascular disease, we're talking diabetes and insulin resistance, we're talking premature aging and inflammation, nervous system conditions, dementia, Alzheimer's, all of these things that are massively on the rise. And every day, more and more people are adopting diets that are deficient in this nutrient. So it's really, really important that we're informed. And omega-3s are specifically EPA and DHA, right? And I'll come to the difference soon. But they, again, are vital for anti-inflammatory, for brain, for mood, for immune function, for energy, and for cell signaling as well. So every cell has a membrane, and that membrane is made up of fats. The omega-3s that we get and we need from food contribute to that cell membrane. So if we're not getting enough, then those cell membranes are compromised, and that cell, it's like a house with no walls or a house with broken down walls. That house doesn't function well. That cell can't get nutrients in and get wastes out and talk to other cells and do what it needs to do healthily without a really healthy membrane. Those fats are absolutely vital. So if we're deficient in these two nutrients, B12 and omega-3s, specifically EPA and DHA, we're at a massively increased risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, and inflammation, which drives just about every single chronic disease that we have in modern times. So you can look up studies regarding just about any chronic disease, and inflammation will be listed as a driver. And deficiencies of these nutrients will drive that inflammatory process, or will allow it to kind of go unchecked in a way. So these nutrients kind of dampen that down and help to sort of, address that inflammatory situation. But looking up the risk factors for dementia, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, it's poor fat balance, a lack of omega-3s, a lack of B12, a lack of other B vitamins, poor DNA replication. So the cells, when they divide and multiply, that multiplication happens poorly. So the new cells that are made aren't as healthy as the old ones, and we get this slow degradation. That's what happens in aging naturally. But this happens in advanced when we're deficient in these certain nutrients. So yes, protein and calcium deficiency also have consequences if we're deficient in those. But as I mentioned, there are reliable plant sources of protein and calcium. There's not an awful lot of deficiency that occurs in a well-formulated diet. However, the number one problem is that there is no reliable plant source of B12 except algae. And who is eating algae? I don't know a single person that eats algae, all right? Similar to, there's also fortified foods I'll mention. So a lot of foods are have B12 added in them because we are, as a population, generally deficient. So they do, especially a lot of in vegan and vegetarian products, they will add B12 into the product to fortify it so that when we eat that, we get more B12. It's essentially supplementing, but via food. The problem with that is that a lot of the foods they fortify are processed, packaged, they're cereals, they're fake meats, they're all these, the breads and things like that, that are all highly processed. And when we're moving towards a more healthful diet, we want to move away from those things. So by moving away from those things into more the whole food, natural, plant-based foods and diet, we're not getting that, that fortification from those foods either. So essentially, for vitamin B12, if you're on an entirely plant-based diet, you absolutely must supplement, and I cannot stress this enough. This isn't just my opinion; it's everywhere. It's well known. It's published everywhere. You absolutely must supplement. All right, and I'm just going to read, if I can find it on my laptop here, a little excerpt from a study that was done on the prevalence of vitamin B12 deficiency among vegetarians. So they did a big kind of review of studies, and essentially the conclusion is that higher rates of deficiency are reported among vegans compared to vegetarians, because there are some obviously dairy and things like that vegetarians will eat but vegans won't, which will include some animal products and therefore some B12. However, the conclusion is the main finding of this review is that vegetarians develop B12 depletion or deficiency regardless of their demographic characteristics, so their age, race, whatever, regardless of their place of residency, their age, or their type of vegetarian diet. Vegetarians should thus take preventative measures to ensure adequate intake of this vitamin, including regular consumption of supplements containing B12. All right, and that's just one. You'll also notice, I don't know, recently there was the big buzz about a vegan diet being the best for everybody, the best diet for everybody and the planet and everything. Now, if you look into that study that prompted those headlines, that study also comes with some serious caveats, which a lot of people completely didn't either look at, or most people don't read the actual source, they read the headlines. So this really, really important caveat was missed massively. And it simply states that the vegan diet is perfect for everybody except certain populations that are at increased risk. And they included pregnant women, children, elderly, people with chronic conditions, and a whole raft of other sort of exceptions of people that it doesn't entirely satisfy their needs, all right, this vegan diet, and that they do need to either supplement or add in some animal foods. Now, the problem with this is that I'm not going to throw an actual percentage out because I'll get come back and mobbed if I give you the wrong percentage. A large majority of us fall into that exception category, all right? So a lot of the large majority of people in the Western world fall into that category because we have chronic conditions, or we have other nutrient deficiencies, or we're exposed to certain things, or we're living in a certain way that expose us to an increased risk, or expose us to being in this exception category, all right? So essentially this study was saying this vegan diet is the perfect diet for everybody except the majority of the population. So it's just really important to know, first of all, that these headlines can be so misleading, and it is so important to look a little bit deeper. And it's also so important to look at those recommendations in context with yourself, all right? So what your needs are. It's very easy to say, oh, well, I'm the normal majority, but often most people aren't that normal, all right? So it's really, really important. So pregnant, those similar sort of categories: pregnancy, adolescents, teenagers, people with an adequate diet sort of baseline dietary nutritional status, which sadly is the majority of us. All right, so that strict vegan diet with no supplementation just isn't suitable for the majority of people, and that's just the bottom line. So supplementation is vital for B12, just as the one particular nutrient that we're talking about now. And there are some different forms of the supplement, so I'm going to pop in the comments here a couple of things to look out for. If you want to go out and grab a supplement, I'll give you a couple of specific recommendations for decent ones. There's different forms that B12 can come in, and again, it's a very personal thing as to your genetics, how well you convert those supplemental forms into the active form that your body can actually use. So taking the active forms of those vitamins is usually more reliable, because you sort of take out that guess factor of, am I good at converting that or am I not? So I'll give you some recommendations in the comments about some supplements, but also I don't recommend you just going out and buying supplements without checking with your health professional, without checking with a nutritionist or your doctor. I verge on the side of health professional and nutritionist and naturopath versus doctor, because the doctors sort of will probably tend to just give you a shot of B12, but ideally this is something ongoing, and the supplements are a much more reliable way of getting the right type of nutrient in there. So I'll add that in the comments, because I really also want to talk quickly about the omega-3 and the EPA and DHA. So equally, when it comes to omega-3, there are some different sources of it. There are plant sources of what's called ALA, which is one omega-3. So omega-3, there's lots of different sorts. ALA is one of them, and yes, there are plant sources of ALA. I won't go into what ALA stands for, EPA and DHA, because they're really long, complicated words, which I won't embarrass myself trying to pronounce. So ALA is essential, all right? Essential means we absolutely must obtain it from the diet. We cannot make it ourselves. Our bodies don't naturally produce it from other things. So ALA is essential, and it is used in certain places in the body in very small amounts. However, mostly what we want ALA to do is to be converted into EPA and DHA, because those are the omega-3 forms that the body uses and needs in quite decent quantities. Now, the problem is that only 1%, some studies say between 0 and 9, but on average about 1% of ALA gets converted into EPA and DHA. And then equally, not many plant sources contain very high levels of ALA. So essentially the sources of that are seeds and nuts, which people often don't eat a huge amount of because of the fat content, and people are concerned about that aspect. So they tend to be things that are eaten in more moderation. So the actual ALA content we're getting from that plant food is relatively small. The amount that is being converted into the really important EPA and DHA is even more minuscule. So what happens is we end up with people that have omega-3 deficiencies. They have deficiencies of EPA and DHA. There are no reliable plant sources of EPA and DHA. They come from animal foods only. So what essentially that means in my, so as I mentioned before, obviously omega-3s are vital for the cell membrane function, anti-inflammatory, brain health, mood health, all of these sorts of things as well. So just a reminder as to why we need that EPA and DHA. EPA and DHA have different functions, but some are sort of more specific for different things. So EPA is much more anti-inflammatory, and DHA is a large component of our brain. So our what we call like the synapses and the myelin, so the protective coating around our neurons in our brain. The majority of the fat in our brain is DHA. So it's absolutely vital that we get good levels of this, and good levels is actually quite a lot more than a lot of people realize. So it's up in the sort of thousands of milligrams. So essentially, this is why, so the main two things there is that there are no reliable plant sources of B12 apart from algae, and of omega-3 except for a tiny amount of a not very good type in nuts and seeds, on the conversion of which is not great in our bodies. So this is what has spawned my reasoning and my personal view that our human bodies are not designed for a solely plant-based diet. We have to supplement B12 if we're on a vegan diet. It's just an absolute must. Now, I think back to our prehistoric ancestors, and I often think this way when I try and think about what's best for our bodies, because our genetics and our bodies are so similar now. We haven't changed genetically from our sort of caveman or pre-agriculture days. So what our bodies need on a functional level and on a sort of cellular level is still the same now as it was then. We didn't have supplements back then, all right? If our prehistoric ancestors were on a vegan diet, they probably would have died out from various nervous system disorders or other sort of conditions that would have not allowed them to survive in that environment. Our brains wouldn't have grown to the size that they are without EPA and DHA and the omega-3s that we need. So this aspect of it, to me, just a lot of people sort of say to me, like, are some people okay on a vegan diet, or am I not suited for a vegan diet? And personally, I think that human bodies aren't suited to a 100% vegan diet. And I know that's controversial for a lot of people, but I do base that on these sorts of scientific recommendations that B12 supplementation is vital if you're on a vegan diet. Now, our ancestors did not have supplements. If they did not have animal foods in their diet, they would have succumbed to various conditions, and they would not have been able to supplement. And I just truly believe that our bodies are designed for some level of animal products. That's the way that we've developed and evolved. I don't believe that we should be eating as much meat and animal products as we currently are. I definitely think that is a big issue. And I'm also just against extreme diets and cutting out entire food groups, such as, animal foods, essentially. So I believe that there is a place for animal foods in our diet. I believe that they can be extremely ethical and moral, and I think that there are ways that we can. They're not extremely ethical at the moment, obviously, our meat sources. However, I think that there's opportunity for them to be if we all reduced our consumption without eliminating it entirely. I think there's a lot of opportunity for change in the meat industry as such. And I'm not going to get into that whole side of it here. What I just really want to let you know is that if you are on a vegetarian or vegan diet, or if you are considering it, please, please, please go and see a nutritionist, a naturopath, or somebody that can look at your diet and make sure you are getting enough of these nutrients and can recommend adequate supplements. If not, and can make sure that your diet is formulated well, all right, so that your vegan or vegetarian diet is the maximally nutritious that is possible for you, all right? That is just my main recommendation, and please, please, please supplement. That's my bottom line, all right? Don't worry too much about protein and calcium when you're cutting out animal foods. Again, with a well-formulated diet and lots of plant-based, as in fresh vegetable-based, you'll get plenty of calcium. And our calcium needs aren't really as high as a lot of people suggest they are, and they absolutely can be got through plant sources. So don't be so concerned about the protein and the calcium. Do be more concerned about the B12 and the omega-3. Personally, I want to see a lot less depression, anxiety, suicide, dementia, Alzheimer's, brain conditions, nervous system conditions, inflammatory chronic conditions, all of these things. And B12 and omega-3s are absolutely vital in this. And I do actually get really concerned that people moving towards these vegan and vegetarian diets are doing themselves more harm than good in these particular areas. So please, please, please seek out qualified and good quality advice if you're going to look at doing these vegetarian or vegan diets. Please reach out to me if you've got any other questions about this. I know this might bring up a bit of controversy, or it might bring up a lot of questions. So please comment here, send me a message, send me an email, do whatever you need to do. I'm happy to help you out with some suggestions where I can to make sure that you're not ending up deficient. One last thing that I forgot to mention is B12 deficiency. So our bodies are very, very good at storing B12. So when people switch to a vegetarian or vegan diet, sometimes the deficiency doesn't become clear until months, sometimes even years down the track, because we can store quite a lot of it and we can only use a little, we can get by on using just a little bit of that at a time. So our stores from eating animal foods can be quite replete, and this can make that deficiency a little bit less obvious. So it can come on a lot more gradually, and also it can come on a lot longer after you adopt these diets, so you don't always make that connection, but it is very, very important. So blood tests are super easy, is another thing that I forgot to mention. Please get tested. It's a really, really simple way. And again, please reach out to me. I've got some really easy finger prick blood tests. You might have seen my post yesterday about my Thriver. Where is my little thing here? Thriver blood test. I did my own update yesterday. I try and do them regularly to keep on top of my own levels and make sure I'm not deficient in anything. It's a super quick home blood test you can do with just a finger prick. Pop it in a tube, post it away, and you can get the results really quickly, and it will give you really accurate information as to your current omega-3 levels, your B12 levels, as well as a lot of other really important nutrients that may be a little bit harder to get through vegetarian and vegan diets, such as vitamin D. Regardless of the diet, we're deficient in that, and a lot of other nutrients as well. And it checks your other levels, thyroid, cholesterol, all of those sorts of things. So please get tested, please seek advice, please leave me questions, comments, send me messages, do whatever you need to do. I want to help us do these diets safely, healthily, without compromising our overall health and the health of our offspring. All right, so if you're pregnant or looking to get pregnant and you're deplete, then your babies are going to be not as healthy and able to develop as well. So there's all sorts of these sorts of considerations, which is super, super important. Please reach out, don't be afraid. I'm here to give you all the advice that I possibly can. All right, take care, everyone. I hope you've all had a lovely week so far. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and I will perhaps chat to some of you soon about some of your comments from today. All right, bye-bye.